It was a sunny afternoon on May 2nd, 2016. Pamela Foster's 11-year-old daughter, Ashlynne Mike, and 9-year-old son, Ian Mike, didn't make it home from school. Their usual routine was to ride the school bus home to Shiprock, New Mexico on the Navajo reservation. Unbeknownst to Pamela, her children had been approached by a stranger as they walked home from the bus stop, who tricked them into getting into his van. Hours later, passers-by found Ian alone, wandering the desert. Ya'ate, we're your hosts, Adrian and Kelsey. Welcome to our new series where we delve into the dark corners of history, highlighting missing and murdered Diné relatives, cases that tend to get overlooked or get pushed out of the focus of public attention. The Ashlynne Mike case takes place in Shiprock, New Mexico. It was the summer time, the end of the school year, and the significance of this case is it is it was a case that really shook the nation because of the nature of what happened, the location in which it occurred, and the actions that were taken to try to ensure that this never happened again.
I remember this case. I
Mhm.
remember it being on the news, and it was before I had my daughter, I believe.
Mhm.
What's the year? It was months before I had my daughter. I was still pregnant with my daughter.
Mhm.
So for me, I don't know. I had this big shift after before I had my daughter and after I had my daughter. My threshold for certain topics was
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, there's this weird fuzziness of anything before my daughter, especially
Mm.
when it comes to stories or cases about children.
Mhm.
And it's hard for me to think about how I felt about it.
Mhm.
Like maybe it was less empathetic and more of like, oh, that's a sad story. But
Mhm.
now when I think of cases going on today, it really, really strikes a nerve. And sometimes I can't even finish reading a post or listening to a story because of how it's affecting me emotionally.
Mhm.
What are some of the challenges that rural communities face when reporting missing and murdered relatives? And how does a community respond when one of their own commits a crime this brutal?
The Ashlynne Mike case, what it brought was a lot of the frailties and the vulnerabilities that people who live in rural communities face, challenges that exist, that open up opportunities for things like this to happen. So in this case, the people who are involved are a young girl. She was 11 years old, and the person who was suspected this of committing this crime. When this occurred, it was very unexpected, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning. The family was looking for Ashlynne. They didn't know where she was. They sought out help from the local police, and the only thing they had to go on was this firsthand account from the brother, the little brother who was 2 years younger than Ashlynne. He was discovered trying to find his way home at night, was picked up by somebody who I think may have been a neighbor or lived in the area. Someone who they trusted enough to tell, "Hey, I need help and I need to get home." So he gets home, and of course, the parents are asking, "Where's your sister? Why did you get home so late? Where were you?" And he was in shock. From what I read about this case and what was reported in the news was that the boy was in shock, and he said, "I don't know where she's at. And he told them this is what happened. We were walking home from the bus stop. This van pulled up, and they said they were going to give us a ride, and it was a man who was driving. And this man started driving away from our house and took us on this dirt road into the middle of nowhere. And we were asking him where we were going, and he wasn't really talking. And we asked him, like, we want to get out, and he wouldn't let them. But at some point, the van did stop, and the man driving told the little boy to get out, and he basically just left him there, and then he continued on. That's all he knew. He didn't know, like, exactly where they ended up. He just knew that his sister was frantic, and he said he just started running. And so this boy, he said that he just ran and ran and ran, and so he was you can imagine being so young and being so powerless and not being able to protect your sister, you know? And when he told that story to his family, of course, they were alarmed. They go to the police department, they let them know, "Hey, our daughter's been kidnapped. We need your help." At the time, there wasn't any kind of alert system in place to notify the general community or people in the region that somebody had been kidnapped. As many people know, there is an Amber Alert system that is usually utilized in situations like this in America. And the Amber Alert system, what it does is it sends out notifications all over the region, and it's really helpful in informing the community about something that's going on. It quickly broadcasts, detailed information about abductions over mass media, highway digital signs, and text messages. And it's basically an early warning system, like an alarm bell that activates and urgently lets people know, the description of the people involved, the vehicles they may be driving, the area they might be in, to let people be on the alert. And so at the time, there wasn't anything like that for this region in the Navajo Nation. And so what happened was they went looking, they were searching, they couldn't find her. They couldn't find the van. It was dark. And Shiprock, New Mexico is very rural, but there's mountains kind of close by. And so it's a huge land base, and so Shiprock is it's a large natural monument that's situated in a valley east of the Cheska Mountains, very close to the Cheska Mountains. It's probably about a 15-20 minute drive from where Shiprock is located to the Cheskas. And then there's this other area called Cove, and there's like big hills, mountains, and even canyons in that region. If you go further east, you're going to reach Farmington and the La Plata Mountains. It's right along the border of Colorado. So it's in that region. It's a big, spacious landscape. There's two main highways, or there's one main highway that cuts through New Mexico, but there's also smaller roads that lead to different scattered communities. So that's the region that people were searching in, and there are not a lot of, like, when you're driving through that area at night, it's very dark. Um, the the homes they're set apart, pretty far apart from one another. So you'll see, light posts every now and then, but the streets are not lined. The highway's not lined with lights. It gets very dark, and if there isn't a full moon, then it will be challenging to find or locate somebody or to track tire tracks. So they did search. They searched. They put the call out, locally, um, but it was very challenging, and it wasn't successful immediately. They did not find her that night.
I guess we can get into like just how rural the reservation is, the Navajo reservation is. Like for me, the closest hospital is a half an hour drive on a highway. if that hospital can't take care of you, they have to helicopter you to a different place that's 2 or 3 hours away.
Mhm.
The closest grocery store, again, half an hour away on the highway. There's nothing for miles sometimes. I'm kind of like in a busy spot of the Western Agency where like there's a road to the Grand Canyon, the road goes straight up to Page, so there's tons of traffic, but
Mhm.
the people are in like scattered housing, there's
Yeah.
miles between neighbors. And the
Mhm.
desert, I think it's like a high elevation desert is what they call it, where it can get cold, really cold at night, even in the summer. Dangerous animals come out in the summer nights, like coyotes, mountain lions, rattlesnakes, and there's a lot of places to hide if you know the land very well. And
Mhm.
there's canyons and caves that you wouldn't know just looking from the highway. Like sometimes I forget, like when we just drive along the highway and then we take a dirt road off. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a giant canyon down this way.
Yeah.
The land
That's
can
true.
be very deceiving. It looks like it's just rolling hills and then there's a giant crevice, that you
Mhm.
can't walk past. It's it's really pretty and isolated, but that also makes it really scary when you're trying to find someone.
Yes. So that's a great point. So there are 4 hospitals across the Navajo Nation, one in Chinle, one in Crown Point, one in Gallup, and then there's the Northern Navajo Medical Center, which is in Shiprock. So those are the 4 main hospitals, and then there are also health centers located in other areas as well. Um, about 9 of them. Um, In Tuba City, there's a Tuba City Regional Healthcare Corporation, which is also considered a hospital, I guess. So you think about this large land base that people say are, comparably the size of West Virginia. It's larger than 10 states, but everything is spread out. We're talking, you know, a land base that spans 3 states, and very like the communities are sparse. There aren't It's not super busy either. There aren't a lot of throughways, there aren't any interstates, and the challenges beyond the healthcare system include the police force. There are substations in different districts, but there aren't, there's only so many. The police force is very minimal. There's 7 districts, including Chinle, Crown Point, Dilcon, Kienta, Shiprock, Tuba City, and Window, and they have about 1 to 5 officers at each location. So that's just a handful of the police force. So most communities have that many people in a town who can conduct a search. And the police force, they're monitoring all the highways, they're looking into all of the crimes, you know what I mean? They're there, like if there's an accident, they report to it, so they have a very big job. And so when something like this happens, it challenges that system, and it really does reveal some of the vulnerabilities that exist within this system. And it draws attention as to, how could this happen? How could this happen, and why did it happen here? And that was one of the questions that was being asked at the time, because when this occurred, it was the boy had said that when they described the suspect, it sounded like this was a suspect that was local to the area. They knew the area, and they were familiar with those back roads. And so that put a lot of concern in the community, like, okay, this is someone who probably understands how likely it is that police are not going to respond right away. This is someone who believed that they could get away with something like this. So it was a crime of opportunity in many ways. Um, so so to continue what happened, so the search continued, and police located her body the next day. Um, it was very very tragic because they were hoping to find her alive. They were hoping that maybe she had been released and was wandering the desert, and even that was scary because it does get cold. It does get very cold at night. It Because it's an area where there are mountains, there are a lot of wild animals, including lions, including bears, coyotes. There's a lot of wild animals out there. Like, there's even been a moose sighting out there in Shiprock. So it's not a great place for a little girl to be on her own. But when they found her, unfortunately, she was deceased, and so they took her body, and they continued the investigation, which had then switched from a kidnapping, and a search mission to a murder. Um, and then the word got out. The news outlets picked up the story, and there was a search, and the communities were alerted, that there was a suspect out there. This is the vehicle they were driving. This is the description of the person, and that we should be on the lookout. And so the community really went to work. They were looking, they were asking questions, they were, trying to track down this van that the boy had described. And they found this person. They found this person located in a community adjacent to Shiprock. And I remember during that time how stressful it was because everyone was upset. And for people who, at the time I was a mother, my children were young. At the time I remember this so vividly because I was I was at the Klein Library at NAU, and I was working on a paper because I had a final that had to be turned in. It was at the end of my semester as well, and I was working on my final paper, and I got the news, and I just dropped everything. I just wanted to hold my children. That was my first instinct. That was my mother's instinct, was to go to my children, to hold them, and it was just, I could not believe it. I was so upset, that something like this could happen to a child, because the truth is crimes like this don't usually happen. You know what I mean? In Like, on Navajo, you don't hear a lot of stories like this about things like this happening. And I think people sometimes, you want to believe that it was an outsider. Maybe it was some criminal traveling through. Maybe it was somebody who didn't know the family. Maybe it was someone who wasn't from the community. Maybe it was someone who had a history of, A, B, and C, and they just happened to be passing through. But it turns out this person lived in the area, and this person, I believe, was from the same tribe. And that was shocking when that was announced, that the suspect that was apprehended so close by. People who knew that person, they remembered that he was driving that van. I think the van was his mom's or something. It was a relative's. He was driving it, and they knew he drove it every now and then. And so they reported it, and they pointed the police in the direction where they thought he might be, and they found him. And um, I remember reading that he was hiding in a sweat lodge in the Tache. And that was just like a backhand to our culture. You know what I mean? Because that's a ceremonial space. To be in that space after you had done something like that was just such a disgusting act, right? It really does. It makes you understand when people say this senseless act, when something like this happens. And so the person was apprehended, and the family was it was reported the family was at ease that somebody, was taken into custody. Um, the person was Tom Begay Jr. He was 29 years old. And I believe this was someone who was kind of a sleeper, someone that we wouldn't expect to do something like this. And yet this occurred, and it was a shock to everybody, including the family of this person, because questions then started to circulate within the community, well, who's their family? What's their clan? How could this happen? Who are they? And it was just this really, it was a big shock to the system, and a lot of people were heartbroken by it. For years, that area where she was taken, people would leave like teddy bears and flowers along the road and where the fence was. And then they held her funeral, and that was kind of, it was a big funeral, and a lot of it was broadcasted. There were photos of the family there, and it was just, I remember seeing a picture of her brother there at the funeral, and I was just like, man, what this boy must be feeling, you know? And it was just one of the most shocking things that happened, that I remember occurring, in my lifetime. And what happened afterward, though, is I think really impactful, because while this person was in custody and being prepared for trial, and the investigation was ongoing, um, Council Delegate Amber Crotty, who oversees that region, she really did, she kind of rallied the people together, saying, this should never have happened. Why don't we have an alert system? Why didn't we find her sooner? What do we need to do? Like, you know what I mean? So she started to look at the weaknesses that existed and say, we need to adjust these. And she started to put people to work and move things around. And her being so vocal and being such a strong advocate really did result in some great changes. Um, when,
Well, like, yeah, just to give like some context, there's
yeah,
no news broadcast system on the Navajo Nation. Like, you can't
hmm,
turn on to like Channel 8 Navajo Nation News. There's
yeah,
nothing like that. And the closest local news that I get would be Phoenix, and that's like 3 hours away. None of
hmm,
their news pertains to me, none of their traffic or their weather. It doesn't affect me at all. The KTNN radio station's the only way to get quote unquote local news. So
hmm,
for me, hearing this story, I read it through Facebook. And
hmm.
even now, my community, the only time we can get up to date current news going on in the world, in our community, is social media. It's
Hmm.
still really difficult to find any relevant broadcasting or, you know, relays of information within our own community.
That's true. Yeah. What I was trying to say is, like, if you're located in the New Mexico area, you're mostly getting broadcasts from Albuquerque, right? So you're right. That is one of the bigger challenges. And, in addition to that, there's like cross jurisdictional challenges that the family faced, these hurdles that exist because of where, um, the Navajo Nation is located. So a large search ran into some of these um these barriers, and it robbed the authorities, of critical hours in their search to find Ashlynne. Um so when Ashlynne was found, so in addition to that, we were talking about how this occurrence forced us all to look more closely at how we raise our children, how we create our own monsters, the legal policies in place that are supposed to protect us, the vulnerabilities that exist, all were so glaringly obvious when the lack of these safety protocols for rural tribal communities became a prominent point of contention. And another thing too, in regard to the cultural significance of what this addressed, or I guess the cultural significance of this crime brought to the forefront of the community dialogue, was that this extreme violation of and Dept Behazani, or Dept fundamental law. Like I said, the suspect was found in a sweat lodge. The suspect was also Diné. The suspect was someone who whose relatives called Yaj, someone whose relative embraced them, as a child of the holy people. And so to do something like this was just, it was just a huge, it was such an attack on a belief system, and it went against everything that our identity, is comprised of. Um, for those who are probably like, what's K'e? I'll just break it down a little bit. So K'e is clan affiliation and our kinship system. This is basically your identity, your bloodline. It identifies you and your entire family, who you are, where you come from. And it also outlines your responsibility, right, to those in your family, to those in your community, to those from your tribe, the responsibility and care, the nurturing, and the respect, right? So there's an affront to all of that. So Diné fundamental law is comprised of four elements. There's Diyen Bitsadet Benahas Ani, which is Diné traditional law. Diyen Diné Bitsadet Benahas Ani, which is Diné customary law. Nahastan do Yadashish Bitsadet Benahas Ani, which is Diné natural law. And Dien Nahoka Diné Behazani, which is Diné common law. So those four elements, those, for example, natural law, that's gravity. That's that's the the moon and the sun. You know what I mean? That's the water systems. That's our ecology, right? That's our ecosystem.
Science.
It's science, yeah. Um so in in so the Navajo Nation has Diné fundamental law written into, there's a code, right? And so I wanted to share a little bit of that, a bit of the language that's in that. And so I'm going to read this. The holy people, that's Diandana, the holy people ordained through songs and prayers that earth and the universe embody thinking, water and the sacred mountains embody planning, air and vegetation embody life, fire, light, and offering sites of sacred stones embody wisdom, and these are the fundamental tenets established. Thinking is the foundation of planning, life is the foundation of wisdom. Upon our creation, these were instituted within us and we embody them. Accordingly, we are identified by our Diné name, our clan, our language, our lifeway, our shadow, our footprints. Therefore, we are called the Holy Earth Surface People. From here, growth began and the journey proceeds. Different thinking, planning, lifeways, languages, beliefs, and laws appear among us. But the fundamental laws placed by the holy people remain unchanged. Hence, as we were created with living soul, we remain Diné forever. And so I wanted to include that because when you're thinking about that, it really shows the connection that we have to everything around us. And so a crime like this, it shocks all of that, right? And it's hard to comprehend and it's hard to accept. It's so inexcusable, it's so unforgivable. And it caused so much pain that rippled beyond just this small community all across the nation. We all felt it. We all lost somebody, during when this happened. So it's really just to bring down the point that a violation of these laws is a violation of all of that, and it's a violation of all that is and will ever be, and so that's how big it is. And so when when we think about crimes like this, and not just in this case but in those that are going to follow, um, I guess I wanted to provide that context just to kind of hopefully share the gravity of the impact that this has, not just on individuals or just the family or even just the person who did this crime, right? It and their family. It's everybody. So the outcome of this is something that we can learn from. Um, a lot of action was taken. The investigation found that he was guilty. I believe he did confess to the crime, and he was sentenced to life in prison, where he is currently serving that time.
Yeah, so I remember reading like a news article or a story again on Facebook, where President Jonathan Nez was saying, because there was backlash on like wanting to give him the death penalty, but he was like, that's not our way. That's not the Navajo way
Yes.
of punishment. He can be in prison for life, but we as a government body are not going to take his life.
Hmm. That's right, and I believe there were also statements too from people that were directly affected saying that they also believe that. So that really does share like show the compassion of people that though you did this to us, we will not do this to you. Because Diné fundamental law, Diné Babet Hazani, is respected, I think, by the majority of people. And I think when things like this happen, though, it really does shake you up and it makes you question your own values. It's even like a test, I think, to some people like, are you still going to abide by this? You know? And it's hard. And it's almost too much. You know what I mean? It's just, it's so awful. It's almost too much to comprehend. It's almost too much to think about, you know? There's so much emotion attached to it because it's so messed up, you know. And I didn't want to go into the details of what happened to her, you know, but um she suffered, you know, and that is unforgivable, you know. And yet the people who were directly affected, they showed compassion, and the president of the Navajo Nation showed compassion, saying that we're not going to stand behind a death penalty. He will serve life in prison. You know, he will spend every day thinking about what he's done, you know? And so that's where he's at now. Another great thing too to I think the good thing that came of this is that 2 years after Ashlynne's death, Congress passed the Ashlynne Mike Amber Alert in Indian Country Act, and the law enhances the training and technical assistance that tribes may receive, and it paves the way for tribes to access state Amber Alert plans. This allows tribes to integrate their Amber plans with those of the state or the region, and it ensures that broadcasts are sent out early and as quickly as possible when something like this happens. And that includes also like those silver alerts, like say if an elder wanders off or goes missing, then it's easier to locate them as well. So we now have this resource in place, which is wonderful. I remember when I first started getting those notifications on my phone, I was so happy. I was like, yes, you know, this is good. You know, we needed this for a long time. And it really was because, you know, people decided to act. You know, they were not going to let this happen again. Well, like on their watch. And so I really do commend those that were a part of that and put in that all of that work to make it happen.
Yeah, I think there was also a change. I remember when I went to school, the bus would just go drop all the kids off and they would just walk to their
Mhm.
house. And now with my child, the bus won't let the kids off the bus unless the parent is there ready to pick
That's
them
right.
up at the spot, which is difficult
Mhm.
because I have to drive half an hour, like half a mile to go pick up my kid from the bus stop. But then again, like where she gets dropped off is right next to the highway, tourists and
Mhm.
everyone driving by. You don't know who's going to stop and pick them up.
That's right.
And
I noticed that too, and you know, I was really happy to see that change happen because yeah, that used to be the norm. You get off at the bus stop and then you walk. When I was living in Tunalia with my family, we used to walk probably like over a mile home. We would get dropped off at the store and then we'd have to walk back home, and it was far. We would walk with our cousins and we had each other, so that was like a little gang, you know. So that was cool. But, you know, that norm had to change. And so I started to see that too. Like when wherever the bus stop was at the end of the school day, you would see all the parents parked there and then they would get their kids. And so that was something that was, it kind of became a mandate in the public school system to protect the children. So this wouldn't happen again. There are still challenges, there's shortages in staffing. Training is ongoing. Preparation for investigations of child abductions is ongoing and evolving, and they're trying to get things better. They're trying to cut through the red tape to make these things faster. I know there's a big push for more law enforcement too on the Navajo Nation because, like I said, they are stretched thin, and when things happen, it's good to have that resource available. And so it is very noble, to serve your nation like that. And I think a lot of people are really quick and ready to jump toward the military, but I do wonder if people would start considering, serving here, on the homeland to protect people.
I feel
That would
like it's
be
always
cool.
like a double thing, being minority and growing up, you see all this aggression from police officers off the reservation. And
Hmm.
then there's the choice of, do I become that same aggressor? I think
Mm.
sometimes happens too, because a lot of the people in my area are, have that punk mindset that rebel against the system, don't trust the
C-town
government.
punk
And then you're like,
mindset.
hey, join the police force, please.
Yeah, it's
It's
definitely not cool to do it. But we do need people. Like if you want to serve your community and you have the desire, to do this work, which is not easy. It's hard. You're fighting our monsters. This is a noble thing that you could do, and you have to really make that decision though. Like, I'm not going to be a sellout. I'm not going to brutalize people. I'm not going to be a bully, right? I'm going to be a good person. And that's hard to do. It's really challenging. Um, but there's also one more resource I wanted to mention real quick. The Missing and Murdered Diné Relatives Initiative. So this is a really great initiative that was started and organized by Council Delegate Amber Crotty. She pulled together so many advocates, people within law enforcement, people that were collecting data all across the nation. What has been a prominent movement outside of the nation has been the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls movement. It really started in Canada and kind of in the northern states. And they have databases. They've been tracking, the missing people in their region. And so we didn't have anything like that here though. And so now we do. We have this cohort of individuals like epidemiologists and researchers and people from all different entities working together within healthcare, law enforcement, education, right? Within council, within government, at various levels, tribal, state, federal, really trying to work together. And so I'm really grateful for that. I'm glad that our people are coming together. And I think that, to learn more, we did include some links. There will be some links included within our description that you can check out yourself and, be involved, get involved, and be a part of the solution.
we keep talking about this statistic of like, based on how much native people there are, it's a higher amount of people being murdered and missing.
Hmm.
And yeah, I feel like
Per capita, yeah.
it's a
Hmm.
statistic we keep talking about that sometimes it feels made up because I saw it so long ago that it's just a fact in my head now that I'm not sure if I made up or not, but it keeps coming
No,
back up.
yeah, no, it's real. It's a true statistic, and that's why I think it's really great that the people within this group wanted to include, you know, men and boys, and of course people of other genders. And the reason why is because those are our relatives. That's somebody's son, that's somebody's husband, that's somebody's uncle. And in our way of life, the men in the family are the ones that carry that spiritual stability. They're the ones that provide those teachings. They're the ones that bring in resources. They're the ones that provide protection for the family, and so they have their role, and their role is so important. And that's why I think, like, that question of how are we raising our kids? How are we raising our boys? What responsibility are we putting on them so that they don't go and do things like this? What can we do different? What can we do better to ensure that they are not going out and making these types of decisions? Instead of being a predator, we want them to be protectors. We want them to be leaders. We want them to be there to help us, you know, get to old age, to help strengthen us, not just family, community, but also our nation as a whole.
Yeah, and that's, I think, starting this series is definitely going to be difficult and emotional. We're going to talk about a lot of tough cases. This one's definitely a difficult case because it's a child,
Hmm.
and those ones always just somehow they feel worse
I
on so
know.
many levels. And it's probably just some evolutionary thing to feel so much more when a child is taken from us. And with this series, there's tons of true crime podcasts out there, you know, but for me, for listening for so many years to different true crime podcasts, our people are hardly ever mentioned. Our
Hmm.
cases are hardly ever mentioned.
Hmm.
Sometimes I hope and I cross my fingers. I'm like, it's May. Will my favorite podcast talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women? And it doesn't happen. So, in that line of, you know, stop asking for something and start making what we want in the world, and
Hmm.
being able to highlight these cases and try and give light to these people who are already gone and now are just overlooked is something that we're trying to do, just so they're not forgotten and that we be able to honor their memory and just know that if your case isn't solved, we hope it does get solved. We're putting it out there.
Hmm.
Maybe someone will remember something. And that happens sometimes with these true crime podcasts. Someone will be listening like, "Hey, I know that case. I know that name. I remember something."
Hmm.
And sometimes cases get solved from this. That would be an amazing accomplishment, but just trying to highlight and with whatever little light we have right now, shining it on some of these people
Hmm.
and their
Yep.
stories.
Yep, absolutely. Well, this was a tough case, but I'm glad we're closing it now. Just kidding. No, my heart goes out to the family and to all those who have been doing this work. And, being involved with MMDR since its inception, I've heard so many stories and shed so many tears. And I felt like having my heart ripped out so many times over and over, but doing it with the end goal of, okay, we're going to find a solution to this problem. We're going to save lives. We're going to be preemptive. And so there's many ways that anyone can be involved. And so I just like to encourage people to visit the links, learn more, and then of course ask us questions too. And if there's questions you have, or any kind of insight that you would like to share, please do in the comments and join us for the next case.
Right. Thanks for
Okay.
listening.